Hey everybody, this is Games Plus James, and welcome back for another development log for Kaboom, our platformer game that all takes place on a giant screen that you can zoom in and zoom out whenever you want, and you can explore this huge dungeon and try and complete it and reach the end. So we're going to take a look back at what I've worked on the last couple of months on the game. One of the most important things, of course, is that the game is available to wishlist on Steam at the moment, which will let you know when the game is officially released, and obviously there'll be like a launch sale when the game first comes out and stuff like that. So it'll let you know about that, and also it really helps behind the scenes with Steam. It helps get the game more noticeable in Steam's algorithms and things like that. So it's really helpful if you can wishlist the game. It doesn't cost anything, just as long as you have a Steam account, it does it there. So rather than listen to me blather on about Steam, let's go ahead and dive back and see what kind of progress have been made in the game to take it to this point right now, where essentially the whole level is pretty much designed. Still lots of work to do on the game, but the actual level that you navigate is pretty much there. But let's jump back and see how that's gone. One of the first things I did from the previous devlog video was I actually went and made these pickups that you collect, something that follows the player, and you have to bring them to a checkpoint to redeem them. So rather than being instantly collected, it adds an extra layer of challenge that you have to keep this thing alive. It's kind of inspired by the idea in Celeste, where you collect the strawberries, but they're redeemed as soon as you touch the ground. But it's kind of expanded a bit further to make it more of a challenge. So these gems that you collect along the way are meant to be like an extra bonus difficulty in the game. They're not necessary to complete the level, but if you want to make things a little bit more harder and a little bit more interesting, an extra challenge, they're there to do that. You can have a good view here of what the actual zoomed out level looks like at this stage of the game too. I also went and added an options menu into the game because it's something that is obviously going to be very necessary. It's pretty basic looking at the moment. It won't look like this necessarily in the final game, but it's got some simple settings for graphics and some simple audio settings, even though currently at this stage there was no audio in the game, but the settings were there for it to make it work nicely. You might have also noticed that in the background here you can see I've changed the spikes to be slightly thinner rather than the big, thick, chunky spikes we had previously. And here in the level you can see it a little bit better. It makes them feel more like actual spikes to me, and a little bit less like big blobs of metal. I also added the fact that the background is black when you're zoomed out. It made it much more readable, so you can actually see what's going on in the level. Previously, if you could see all the level and all the background detail and stuff, it made it very hard to actually tell what's going on, but having it just be simple black makes it much easier to read and much easier to actually play as in a zoomed out kind of focused. I also added in these little doors here that you can run through, which basically mark the transition between one area and another. I'll have the plan is to have a little graphic on screen that says the name of the area you're walking into, but these doors are here because the backgrounds will be much more different between them, and they're not just going to be these kind of checkerboard effect. So we want to have some kind of transition between those areas to make them look a little bit more obvious. So then it was time to start working on some new areas in the game. So I added this kind of elevator section where you have to avoid some little moving elements in the game. And something that's probably a little bit less obvious visually is that I actually added a system to control the timing of everything in the game, because there was previously a problem with the game where certain objects would get out of sync with each other, and you'd end up in a situation where basically sections of the game became impossible to do because they had mistimed things, so that maybe a whole corridor of traps were coming out at the same time, and that was not very good at all. So you can kind of see in some of these sections there's a lot of things moving around at once, and they need to be on a specific set time. So I added that into the game, so now that works much, much better. I also finally got around to adding some music into the game. So we got a very, very basic music track. It's just something placeholder, but it just gives the game a little bit of an extra feel, and there's some sound effects added into the game as well. And the idea is the sound effects only work for items that are close to the player, essentially. So we're not just hearing the sound effects of the whole world. And one other thing is that the sound effects don't actually play when you zoom out. So you can hear the sound effects here. When I zoom out, you no longer hear them, because we don't want to hear the sound effects of the whole level all at once or anything like that. So next up on my list was adding some more sections into the game. So I added this little section here with these rotating saws that kind of go around in a little path around you. They were a fun little challenge to do. There's a whole little section here. Basically the idea of the game is you encounter a section with a different kind of trap, and then those traps can appear later in the level as well, but you'll first encounter them and learn how to deal with them. in each section as you go. I also added a section with proximity spikes. So these spikes appear when the player gets close enough to the tile. So basically when they walk on a tile or walk underneath these spikes, the spikes will then push out of the ground. It's basically a way to keep the player moving around in the level. So again, they're an extra little thing because suddenly you're under this pressure that you have to keep moving or else you're going to get killed by these little spikes. I also started work on a section here which is probably my favorite section in the game, which is this shadowy section. The idea what I had was that you would hide behind these different walls here. So obviously at the start here, it's not quite working the way I intended. So rather than sticking with that, I filled out that section a bit more, and then I made it so that when the player walked into that area, they turned to solid black. So now you can't quite see the player at every place, and it becomes a game of you really have to pay attention to everything going on around you. There'll never be a danger in one of those hidden black areas, because that's just totally unfair. Well, I say that, there'll never be a surprise danger. There is elements that move in and out of those black areas, as you can see here, these spinning saws that move up and down. But there'll never be one hidden there that you can't potentially see. As long as you pay attention to what's going on around you, you'll always be able to survive anything. And that's kind of a key element of this game in general. You can see also I've added these bouncing little saws that kind of move up and down. Much like those blocks, the saws that went around the block you saw a moment ago, these ones just kind of freely move around in the air. I also added this section with a big massive rotating laser that you have to try and survive along the way, which is a lot of fun, and it's a pretty good challenge I find as well. Even me knowing the way to survive these things, I quite often get killed, as you can see here. So with this giant spinning object, I also added these smaller spinning objects and this kind of lava section. So you got these lava pools, you got spinning little lasers, you've got these little fireballs that bounce up out of the pools. This is probably the hardest section in the game. This is the second last section, and it's pretty tight with everything, but it's all about being patient, and it's all very doable to get through this stuff. And the final section I added is this gravity switching section. So you have to somehow survive your way through all this area, and switching gravity like this, I find personally, makes things much harder. So the trap design here is a little bit simpler than in the previous sections, but having to deal with being upside down actually makes it a lot harder to control and to pay attention to what's going on around you. But it's also, again, I find it lots of fun to try and do this stuff as you go. And with this section, the basic level design of the game was essentially done at this point. So from here, it's going to be a lot of getting things working and getting extra stuff added in. But there's still plenty of stuff to talk about here. So while the level design is done, I was still obviously adding a lot more things to the game. And one of the major things I was adding to the game was an intro sequence. So at the moment now, when you start the game, you start off running into this area here, and you have some control. The player is able to control and get a feeling for how the character moves and how you jump and stuff like that, your two main interactions in the game. And then you go over and get this try to get this hunk of meat, but you get dropped into the level where you're hopefully going to try and make your way across the whole level to get your delicious hunk of meat that obviously Scoot really wants to eat. And I was pretty happy with how that turned out. I think it works pretty well. Still a bit more work to do on it. There's no sounds on it at the moment or anything like that, but that's okay. We can add all that stuff in as we go. And so with that intro sequence done, I also wanted to add another sequence to sort of end the level, but there's a little bit more gameplay after this. But you get down to this area and you try to get your little hunk of meat, but then the big bad guy has it trapped, but Scoot cannot be stopped and destroys the thing. And as you eat the meat, basically the idea is you get all powered up, the whole place gets destroyed, all the traps and things like that stop working, and you are now invincible, and you essentially have to make your way back out of the entire dungeon. But I'm not going to force you to go play through the whole level. There's now big holes in the wall. This level design is going to be changed, but it's much easier. You can see, so I'm back in almost the first area now. There's holes in the wall. There'll be rubble lying around and things like that, so that you can just escape back to the level. It should take about a little less than a minute to get out. You can see you've also got a sort of rocket-powered jump, so you can essentially fly around the level. So it's just to give the player a little bit of a feeling of, whoa, I'm powerful now. I've completed the challenge of getting through the dungeon. And now I've got a reward of, hey, I can do this fun thing. This takes less than a minute and we'll fly away and you reach the end of the game. With that done, I then went and started adding some more artwork to the game because obviously we need some variety. We don't want just the same green grass everywhere. So I added in different sections into the game. So we've got this temple section. We've got this kind of radioactive nuclear facility section is the idea in my head. But again, the backgrounds need to be worked on to sort all this stuff out. We've got the dark section. We've got this purpley lab. We had a snow section back there. We have the lava section. So all these different areas now have unique looks to them, which will really be filled out more when we add some backgrounds into all these areas as well. But you can now get a bit of a better sense of, hey, these are the different sections that I'm in the level. And one other thing I wanted to do was make it so that the blocky nature of the level wasn't 100% there. I wanted to break it up a little bit so that we didn't have the huge blocks everywhere. So for example, in this first section especially, I wanted to have it be a little bit more kind of broken up, so you had some smaller jumps and things like that to again practice how the jumps work for the player. The idea of the labyrinth, I didn't want to change the kind of boxy nature of the labyrinth too much because that was part of the aesthetic that I wanted to go for from the beginning. So I didn't want to change that too much, but it was just to break it up a little bit more as we go. I also made it so that the UI will come in and zoom in and out from the sides on the right when you zoom in, zoom out. As you can see on the right hand side there, when you're zoomed in, there's nothing, but when you zoom out, you can see how many deaths you have, how many gems you collected, what time you're on, and stuff like that. One important thing to note as well is that I did make it so that when you are near those areas, it won't appear. So you can see at the moment when you're zoomed out, that in the top right, for example, that obscures a whole bunch of the level there. But if I take the player and fly over to that area, you'll see that that kind of fades out when the player gets close to it, because you don't want to be able to see that. And there's also the option, or there will be the option, that information will appear when you pause the game as well. So it's not that if you're in that area you can't ever get that information. You can just pause it and you'll see the same thing being told to you. But there you go. Those are the things that I worked on in this time. The most time-consuming thing was designing all the rest of the traps and making the rest of the level be complete. That was kind of the most consuming thing in developing this whole game in general. So at this point there's lots of little things I want to work on and get added in, but the core gameplay is there. And this also means that now I'm able to start getting the game into the hands of some friends and things like that to get them testing the game and get them to start playing what's going on here. So there you go. That's essentially what's working in the game at the moment. Lots more still to do, of course, but it's been a lot of fun working on this game. If you haven't already, make sure you go and wishlist the game on Steam. Oh, I just got myself chopped up. Go and wishlist the game on Steam. As I said, it really, really helps out the game, and most importantly, lets you know when the game is released. There'll be a link on screen, in the description down below. Everywhere that you could possibly want a link, you will find one. And there will, of course, be more development logs, but if you enjoyed this, you also can, of course, learn how to make your own games here on the channel. Make sure you do that, and make sure you join us and make cool games along the way. If you join us on Discord, you can join the community where we're talking about all the games everyone's making. And of course, you need to hit that subscribe button to make sure that you can see more of these videos, if that's a thing that you're interested in. So thanks for watching this video. I'll be back soon with more tutorials, more devlogs, and more of everything. Keep being awesome, and I'll see you all very soon.